Welcome back to the GSMC Sports Podcast brought to you by the GSMC Sports Network. In this final segment, we are going to be touching on some of the games that took place last night across the NBA. Specifically, going to be looking at the Mavericks and the Bulls. But before we get into all of that, we have a couple trades to announce. The first of which including the Boston Celtics, who just traded for Grizzlies big man Xavier Tillman. I think that this is a very solid move for the Celtics. They give up a couple of second round picks in 2027 and 2030, so not at all too much of a real price. The Grizzlies, though, this is a team that's had so many injuries throughout the course of the season. This is a lost year for them. They don't think that they are going to see Tillman being a part of the Celtics being part of the Grizzlies long term, and in return they get a couple second round picks. This is probably just a 1-year rental for the Celtics, but also just giving up a couple of second rounders that, we saw the Celtics come the NBA draft. They just kept rolling over these first round picks. They had initially gotten a first round pick in the Marcus Smart deal, but instead they just kept trading back and acquiring all these different second round picks, trading those for more second round picks. So it was really just to acquire, general assets like that to make these types of moves. And they end up with Tillman, who I think is a very good defender. He was very significant, I felt like, in that Lakers series last season. The Grizzlies obviously come up short, but Celtics adding him for a bench guy is a pretty solid move. I had been wondering why Tillman wasn't getting more minutes for the Grizzlies, and I'm excited to see him in the green and white. Then the other trade we have to announce is the Detroit Pistons, who we talked about on the show earlier this week, have sort of been weird about how they view themselves. They want to actually acquire talent as opposed to sort of sell off. They trade for Utah forward Simone Fontecchio. Fontecchio, someone that a lot of people probably don't know in the national media, but I've really liked his game this year. I think he's a very good three-point shooter. He kind of came out of nowhere onto the scene as far as getting these significant minutes consistently the way he has this year, but he's a very solid player. I probably would have liked him more in a situation that is a little more win now. He probably wouldn't be a starter necessarily on maybe one of these other teams, but I think that he can give very good minutes at least. And you know what, for Detroit, this is probably a fine move. Obviously, I feel like the Pistons are so interesting because they should ideally already have their franchise guys in place between Cade and Jaden Ivey and Jalen Duren. They have different players at different positions, but if they are trying to sort of raise that floor and establish more of the culture, I don't hate that move. That was for some second rounders as well. So again, pretty low stakes trades, but it is more than we have gotten up to this point. So that's a little trade update for you. Now moving on to my thoughts on the Mavs and Bulls games from last night. The Minnesota Timberwolves blew another lead and really have just not looked up to scale lately. Their late game offense has just been really messy for them. Now, the Bulls were flying around last night. I was actually very encouraged from them, which puts me in this weird position because going into this game, as they are down 23 points, I'm thinking, God, they just have to blow it up. And they're not going anywhere. And while that's still probably the case, they end up coming back specifically by the hands of Coby White. Coby White is a most improved player candidate for the season. When I did my mid-season awards, I initially had Tyrese Maxey, and almost immediately I had regrets about the fact that I didn't go with Coby White instead, just because we already knew Tyrese Maxey was good heading into this year. Coby White coming out of nowhere is definitely dramatic, but he went from being a bench guy, a sort of maybe 20 minutes a game guy, to an every night starter for them, and he has been tremendous. He struggled in the first half, 3 points on just 1 of 7 shooting, but went off down the stretch. He finished with 33 in the second half on, because this game did go to overtime. He shot 10 of 14, and he's becoming their guy. Part of the issue, though, that I have with the Bulls here is that they have somebody already there who, in his eyes, is the guy, and that is DeMar DeRozan. And DeMar DeRozan, I think, is somebody who can definitely help contribute to a winning team. But for the Bulls, I think it sort of log jams their development as a young core. And, it's so much DeMar DeRozan down the stretch. It's always looking to him for the game winner. They did so again last night, where they had called the timeout with 2 seconds left. And it was just the same old DeMar DeRozan at the corner, spinning, fading, and this one was a miss. And I like DeMar DeRozan a lot. Again, I think that this idea of being able to get to your spot and take the shots when other people may be scared to is a valuable thing. And I think that it can be valued more on different rosters. But for the Bulls, I think it just sort of takes away from the development of these guys. Coby White specifically is one of the guys that I'm looking at here, but they need to hit that reset button. They've had to for a couple of years now. Now, Nikola Vucevic, he had a quote a few days ago about thinking that they have enough, was the quote. I'm not sure what enough is for. Like, it's enough for making the play-in tournament again, but they're just not the level of contenders that they seemed like they could have been for that first half stretch when everybody was healthy for them. Lonzo was there. They were the best defensive team in the league, essentially, and it just has sort of fallen apart from there. And, I don't blame them for trying to push their chips in a little bit and go for it, because at the time the East seemed like it was a little more open. LeBron James was just leaving the Eastern Conference. You still had the Celtics sort of coming up in age, and the Bucks at that point were unproven, so it wasn't a bad move at the time, I feel like. But now you have to sort of reconsider and reevaluate the situation, and that is they are not a top 5, probably not a top 6, probably not a top 7 team in the conference. And again, I don't like the idea really of tanking in this season because of the quality of the draft, but I think it's more just maximizing the value of the assets that you have. And I think that DeRozan and Caruso are too good to be playing on this team that just isn't very good themselves. So I would like to see them move. There was an interesting stat that Kenny Beecham tweeted out last night it was this morning actually, talking about the on-off differential with DeMar for Coby White, and they were significantly better with Coby on the field, on the court. And I just feel like they sort of need to pick a direction, because one playoff appearance since 2018, which was a first round exit even then. So they just need to sort of restock here. And no, they don't have their superstar really, or even their true star, but it seems like Coby White is blossoming into something for them. I would give him the keys. Just guarantee yourself a better lottery position and just try and evaluate some of these younger guys. Patrick Williams Jr., Pat Williams, he hasn't been great for them really since being drafted. It was, if you remember back to the consensus at the time, it was that he was a little bit of an overdraft, but he's still shown flashes at time. I just think that they need to sort of hit that reset button and try and move on from here. On the other end of the NBA slate last night, we had the Dallas Mavericks playing the Brooklyn Nets. This was Kyrie Irving's return to Barclays Center, and he came out with some vengeance for sure. He was incredible. Him and Luka combined for 71 points. He had 36, I believe, himself, and he just sort of ran it up against this former team. Had some interesting comments after the game talking about this shoulda, coulda, woulda with the Brooklyn Nets and giving a very Kyrie answer that we're sort of used to about the idea of the potential what could have beens and all of that. But instead, he is on the Mavs now, and the Mavs have really been showing out. I talked about them earlier this week, I think that they should sort of buy into this roster. Their offense is so good. As far as how far their offense can carry them alone, 4 rounds sounds like a lot to just lean on really those two guys, plus Tim Hardaway Jr., who has also been an incredible scorer for them. And, I like some of their role pieces with Derrick Jones Jr. and Dante Exum, Maxi Kleber coming off the bench. And again, I gave this whole sort of roster overview the other day, but I think that they need to address the defense more. And I think that they have a tradable contract with Grant Williams that you could send him and some other stuff to Portland to possibly get Jeremy Grant, or maybe try and find a Dorian Finney-Smith in the market. I think that they need a wing defender because this team, you never know with Kyrie is the thing. But here's also the argument, is they did invest into Kyrie Irving. I personally wouldn't have if I were in the position, but they thought that it was worth investing into, and you're finally getting a committed Kyrie Irving the first time he's been committed to a team in years. So now you have to sort of make the most of it. They're still in this Luka situation where they have to a little bit worry about keeping him bought into the franchise and not wanting to go anywhere else. It's been fine for now. Luka seems legit happy playing with Kyrie Irving. Kyrie hit a couple huge threes down the stretch where Luka almost looked amazed. And this is Luka, who is just as good as a scorer as anybody else is in the NBA today. And he just seems to be happy that he finally has this running mate that he has full confidence in, that he doesn't have to carry the load fully by himself. Jalen Brunson was a good player on Dallas, obviously, but he, at the time, too, hadn't really fully established himself as quite the level that he was. He wasn't as refined of a scorer or a leader in general because he was still sort of building up his confidence and his skills to even himself personally know that he was the guy on that level. And they bought into this identity of just running the offense, shooting the heck out of the ball, and having a couple wing guys that you can just plug in if you just stand there and watch. Grant Williams had an interesting quote the other day talking about where you just kind of stand there and eating popcorn, and when Luka hits you, you just got to knock down the shot, which is a little reductive, especially maybe talks a little bit. I don't have questions about Grant's effort on defense, but maybe sort of an example of just the way that this team doesn't really seem to have a true defensive identity. I know that he was talking about the offensive side of the ball in this quote, so I don't want to sort of myself aggregate it or anything, but I think that this is a Mavericks team that, are they finals contenders? No, but if they can find any form of a more reliable defense, I think that, and these guys are both engaged in playing. We saw Luka single-handedly pretty much carry the Mavericks to a conference finals a couple years ago. If you add a committed Kyrie Irving to that, I think things get really dangerous in the West, where there are a couple teams that maybe don't have necessarily the same level of experience and defense. So I don't know. If I'm the Mavericks and I'm Mark Cuban, I'm trying to buy in. You already bought into Kyrie Irving because you want to sort of speed up this timeline and get Luka a real championship contender. I think you should follow through with that movement as a whole and go for it. So that is all I have for today. Thank you very much for listening. We will be back tomorrow at 2 o'clock. Just a quick update. Friday, we're going to be running the show at 8 o'clock p.m. as Eastern Time as opposed to 2. So just a heads up there. But thank you all for tuning in. Thank you to the GSMC Sports Network for allowing us to host this show. And we will see you tomorrow.